But my next guest says they're not the ones he's most focused on. He just released his top economic trends to watch this year, and there are a few things he'd add to that list, like greenflation. Let's welcome in Ruchir Sharma. He's Chief Global Strategist at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, also the author of The 10 Rules of Successful Nations. Ruchir, it's great to have you here today. So what would some of your top concerns be?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I think that, as you pointed out, that greenflation is a concern for me because we're all very obsessed with this tech-oriented world, but some basics are being forgotten, which is that to build this new tech world and also as we get more concerned about climate change, we still need to use a lot of commodities to get there. And what I think is sort of underappreciated is how underinvested we are in some of these major commodities. And it's not just oil, it's got to do with copper, it's got to do with aluminium. And the underinvestment in these commodities over the last 5 or even 10 years has been pretty significant. And yet demand is expected to only increase for some of these commodities as we look to build a new green infrastructure. So yes, greenflation remains one of my top concerns going into the new year.
And I should say, while it may be a concern for you and a problem for end customers, it could be a good thing for people who want to lay their bets on commodities because you are seeing significant price appreciation. Overall, some of the other concerns you have, I mean, baby bust is one that underpins everything that we talk about, from the debt and deficit situation to the worker shortage. Explain how you think that could be a risk this year.
Well, I think that this has been one of the big surprises of the pandemic, which is the fact that we've had a baby bust, which is that people thought that staying indoors, maybe we'll have a pickup in birth rates. Instead, we've had a decline in birth rates in most major economies around the world, and China is leading that decline in some ways. I think this has significant growth implications because the world's labor force in many countries was already shrinking before the pandemic, and that shrinkage has been accelerated by the pandemic. Now, remember that the main reason the global economy grew at a very fast pace in the post-World War II period was because we had a baby boom. There was a massive demographic dividend that the world reaped after the Second World War. That demographic dividend is over for most countries in the world. There are more than 50 countries now where the labor force is shrinking. That number was just 17 at the start of a century. So a major trend which presages slower economic growth in the decade ahead.
All right, one more, because we can only handle 3 pieces of bad news at once. So let's talk about the productivity paradox. This is important. Again, it underpins everything. We saw a surge in the U.S. last year, but you're saying it's already petered out, and it was only the U.S. where we saw that.
Yeah. We saw a big surge in productivity, and a lot of people thought that something was going on here in terms of increased digitization, which is true. But I think that the data is just not bearing that out, because usually you do tend to see a big surge in productivity at the start of an economic recovery, and that tends to fade. And that's the pattern which we are again following, only just more quickly, because people seem to be working longer hours from home, but not producing anything significantly more. So I think that that is another concern. Now, this is not all a gloomy picture, but since we have picked on 3 concerns, the productivity paradox is something which really is something I find very disconcerting, given the kind of technological advances we are seeing in the world.
Yeah. Ruchir, thank you. We'll leave it there. Ruchir Sharma joining me from Morgan Stanley Investment Institute.